Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine just a perfectly ordinary day, right? Maybe you're walking to school, maybe moving into a new apartment, feeling good about things,
Yeah, the sun's out, everything just feels normal.
and then bang, without any warning, that normalcy is just shattered. A shadow falls over it. A predator steps out. Quiet at first, maybe even seems okay.
But inside,
Mm.
holding this capacity for just um, unimaginable horror.
It's a terrifying thought, isn't it?
It really is. And what the sources we're digging into today show is that for someone like this, these moments, these invasions,
Mm.
they aren't isolated incidents. They're often early, chilling previews of a pattern.
Right.
And what's really fascinating and honestly deeply unsettling here is how two specific moments, years apart, thousands of miles apart, are linked. Not just by the same man, Rodney Alcala, but also by these critical gaps in the system, gaps that let him get away
Mm.
again and again in these early stages.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're pulling from a whole stack of source material. We've got case files, accounts from investigators, survivor stories, news archives, biographies, stuff that reconstructs two absolutely critical early moments in Alcala's violent history.
We're talking about a brutal assault in Los Angeles back in 1968, and then a murder in New York City, 1971.
Our mission today, really, is to get deep into this material. We want to pull out the key information, the insights, to understand the terrifying nature of Alcala's violence right from the get-go.
Yeah, and also his chilling ability to just disappear, to evade capture even when he was identified early on, and the tragic consequences of those early escapes, consequences that just rippled outwards for years.
We'll be relying heavily on the details preserved in those old LAPD and NYPD files, and the raw accounts from people connected to the victims, the investigators trying to catch them.
And also putting it in the context of the time, right? What law enforcement could and importantly couldn't do back then.
So we're going to look really closely at that horrifying assault on an 8-year-old girl in LA, Tali Shapiro, a case where they knew who he was right away, but he just vanished, slipped through the net.
And then, tragically, the murder of this vibrant young woman in New York City, Cornelia Crilley, just a few years later, he's using a different name there, John Berger. And the systems back then, they just couldn't connect the dots, couldn't link him back to that earlier crime in California.
These incidents, they didn't just expose Alcala's cruelty, did they? They really laid bare the huge challenges law enforcement faced. These fragmented jurisdictions, pre-modern forensics, no real way to share information quickly, sometimes with fatal results.
Which brings up maybe the most important question the sources make you ask right from the start.
Yeah.
How does a known predator, someone identified clearly after one horrific crime, just disappear, cross the entire country, commit another equally brutal act, and seemingly go completely undetected thousands of miles away?
It seems impossible now, but
Well, the details in these case files, they really help us understand the grim reality of police work back then, the limitations. And they reveal just how chillingly effective a killer could be if he was already good at using aliases, exploiting those exact limitations, basically becoming a ghost.
it's a stark lesson, isn't it? How easily evil can hide when the lines of communication just aren't there.
Exactly.
All right, let's dive deep into that first horrifying chapter. We start in West Hollywood, California, 1968. Okay, Section 1. The Shapiro Assault, West Hollywood, 1968. So the source material, it takes us right back to a specific day, September 25th, 1968.
Just a sunny Thursday morning. West Hollywood, California. Seems like a typical suburban LA day, you know. The descriptions really emphasize how ordinary it all felt.
And there's 8-year-old Tali Shapiro doing what millions of kids do every day, walking to school.
Yeah, she's described as small for her age, carrying her school books. Just another kid starting her day on what felt like a completely normal street.
And that's what makes it so terrifying, right? The way that normalcy is just violently broken.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tali, she's described as bright, trusting, but also having this sharp intuition, apparently. She's walking along the sidewalk, and this man approaches her, driving a green Volvo.
Okay.
And the reports, they note how he presented himself. Handsome, charming, polite. He pulls over, offers Tali a ride to school.
But even at 8, she knew better. She'd been taught about strangers.
Right. Listen to her instincts. She politely refused his offer, kept walking, purposeful, heading towards school.
She gets to the school grounds, but then something changes. Maybe that weird encounter stuck with her, or maybe she genuinely felt sick. The sources aren't totally clear on why.
Yeah, the exact reason isn't pinned down.
Yeah.
But whatever it was, she decides she needs to go back home.
And this decision, completely innocent, right? Just a kid feeling unwell. It unknowingly sets up the next horrifying part.
Because as she walks back towards her apartment building on North Sweetser Avenue, she has no idea she's still being watched.
Oh.
The source material, drawing on what investigators figured out later, makes it chillingly clear. Alcala hadn't just driven off when she refused the ride. He'd followed her.
He watched her go to school and turn back.
Yeah, watched her turn back, then shadowed her all the way home to her building. He found out where she lived.
So when she gets to her door,
He's there, waiting for her. The man from the green Volvo, Rodney Alcala. He'd found his prey's den, essentially, and positioned himself to intercept her.
what happened inside that apartment, apartment 304? The case files lay it out in grim detail. But the human reality, it's just a nightmare you can barely wrap your head around.
He didn't force his way in, not initially. He lured her inside.
How?
The sources don't give the exact words, but the implication is he kept up that polite facade just long enough to get her through the door. And then, instantly, the mask drops,
That charming man just vanishes.
replaced by pure, unleashed violence. The level of brutality described is shocking, even knowing the crime. The
Yeah.
sources really emphasize how extreme it was, how gratuitous, meaning he didn't just attack her to subdue her for the sexual assault. He savagely beat her with his fists and, crucially, with a metal bar.
A metal bar on a child.
Yes. It wasn't just about control. It was about inflicting pain, this explosion of rage. Dr. Reeves, who's referenced in the sources for his analysis of Alcala's psychology,
Yeah.
he points specifically to the ferocity of that beating, way beyond what's needed to overpower a little girl. He sees it as a key sign of this deep-seated rage and sadism that was already fully formed in Alcala.
So after the horrific sexual assault,
He left her for dead, on his bed, which was soaked in blood. The sheer brutality, the overkills, it's a stark, early marker of just how profoundly deviant he already was.
but somehow she survived. Fate intervened.
Miraculously, yes. In the form of a worried father and a vigilant neighbor, Tali's dad got concerned when she didn't come back to school after leaving.
So he went looking for her.
Yeah, searched the route she would taken, and he found her school books scattered near Alcala's apartment building.
Oh, that must have been horrifying.
Absolutely. And around the same time, a neighbor who happened to see a little girl go into the building with a man earlier, they came forward and reported it. Suspicion, grim and heavy, quickly focused on apartment 304.
And that's when the police arrive. LAPD.
Right. Officers Chris Camacho and his partner. And what happens next, which Camacho recounted vividly later, it just highlights Alcala's chilling composure, his almost unbelievable arrogance.
They knock on the door.
They knock on apartment 304. Rodney Alcala opens it. The description is consistent.
Mm.
Cool, calm, collected. Zero panic in his demeanor.
Wow. What did he say?
The interaction, as it's documented, is just surreal. Alcala greets them, seems cooperative, claims they must be mistaken, maybe looking for someone else, insists he's been alone all morning, just studying, completely undisturbed.
Studying right after that.
Exactly. And then, the most audacious move. He calmly gives them permission to enter. Confidently says he has nothing to hide.
He thought he'd cleaned up enough that they wouldn't find anything.
He genuinely believed he could talk his way out of it. He literally stepped aside, invited the police into the scene of this horrific crime, totally confident he could control the whole situation.
Unbelievable. So Officer Camacho goes in.
Camacho enters first, scans the living area, looking for any sign of disturbance, any trace of a child, a struggle. Nothing immediately jumps out. It looks disturbingly normal.
But then,
And his eyes land on the closed bedroom door. Something felt wrong. He walks towards it, turns the knob, pushes it open.
and this is the moment he described later, the one that haunted him.
This is it. What he saw in that room was, in his words, horrific. Tali was on the bed, covered in so much blood, she was almost unrecognizable. Her small body just broken.
Oh my God.
His first thought, his gut reaction, the one that stayed with him forever, was that she was gone, that she was dead.
But she wasn't.
No. Then, amidst all that horror, a flicker of hope, a miracle, really. He saw a faint movement, a tiny, shallow breath, almost imperceptible. She was alive, barely clinging to life.
Devastating. But she was alive.
And that realization that she was alive,
Look.
it sparked immediate action.
Camacho's response was purely instinctual, right? Urgent.
Absolutely. Knew he had to get her help fast. He grabbed his radio, voice tight with urgency, cutting through the usual police chatter. Officer needs assistance. Ambulance required immediately. Child victim critical.
While his partner secured the scene,
Camacho stayed right by Tali's side, offering what little comfort he could in the face of, well, unimaginable brutality. The focus, understandably, shifted entirely to saving this little girl's life.
And in that chaos, in that desperate focus on the rescue, Alcala saw his chance.
Exactly. His whole carefully built facade crumbled the second Camacho opened that bedroom door. He saw the officer's attention was now totally on Tali, his control over this situation gone.
So he just walked out.
He just walked out of the apartment. While the police were consumed with the critical, urgent task of saving the child he had just tried to murder, Rodney Alcala slipped away, melted into the streets of L.A., and was gone. Just like that.
Incredible. Meanwhile, Tali, she's rushed to the hospital.
Critical condition. The source material details her injuries, and they're horrific. Massive head trauma, a fractured skull, severe internal injuries from the rape.
How long?
She spent 32 agonizing days in a coma, her life just hanging by a thread. Her survival, honestly, it was against all medical odds, a testament to her incredible resilience, but also to Officer Camacho finding her when he did, getting that immediate aid.
But surviving that, the recovery must have been
Immense. While Tali survived, her life was changed forever. The physical injuries healed slowly, painfully. But the emotional, the psychological scars, they ran incredibly deep. Years of difficult recovery, physical and emotional. That trauma became a permanent part of her existence.
And the man who did this, Alcala.
He was identified. They had his apartment, a crime scene. They had the victim fighting for her life in the hospital. But he was free. The LAPD had his name, his address, a clear link, but he had vanished.
Which brings us to the significance of this attack, right? What the sources, especially the expert analysis like Dr. Reeves, point to. Why was this crime such a critical marker?
Well, several things stand out, really. First, as we mentioned, that extreme violence. The prolonged savage beating. It went so far beyond just subduing her.
It indicates that rage, that sadism you mentioned.
Exactly. It shows it was already a fundamental part of his psychological makeup. This wasn't some impulsive act gone wrong. It was fueled by this profound internal darkness.
And the victim's choice, an 8-year-old.
That points to a very specific, disturbing deviance that was already firmly established. This wasn't a first tentative step into violence. It suggests these specific urges, these preferences, were already deeply entrenched.
Okay. And his behavior with the police afterwards?
Chillingly calm, almost arrogant. It demonstrates this terrifying ability to compartmentalize, to completely separate his monstrous actions from his outward presentation and sophisticated manipulation.
He wasn't panicked at all.
Not according to Camacho. He was calculating, believing he could deceive trained officers. This wasn't a crime of passion, someone losing control. It was deliberate, cold-blooded cruelty.
And his escape, running away.
It wasn't panic. It was the calculated move of a predator, prioritizing his own freedom above everything else, avoiding capture so he could presumably hunt again. This horrific act, followed by his successful escape, it tragically confirmed what his actions showed. A severely antisocial personality, already capable of monstrous acts, who understood how to evade accountability.
And the LAPD couldn't catch him, not right away.
No. He successfully fled California, which allowed him to just disappear, become a ghost. And tragically, it set the stage for the next chapter of his violence, thousands of miles away.
Which is exactly where the source material takes us next. Alcala didn't just disappear locally, he fled the state, put serious distance between himself and West Hollywood.
Yeah. According to the sources, after that attack on Tali Shapiro, Rodney Alcala vanishes from California and surfaces over 2,500 miles away in the middle of the bustling, anonymous sprawl of New York City.
And he didn't just move, he changed his identity completely.
Fundamentally, arrives with a new name, John Berger.
John Berger. And he starts building a new life, or at least a new cover.
A convincing facade, yeah. He enrolls at NYU New York University, presents himself as an aspiring photographer, cultivating this whole new persona, artistic, intellectual.
And here's a detail from the sources that's just ice cold when you know what just happened in California.
It really is. Even after the brutal attack on Tali Shapiro, he gets a job as a counselor at a prestigious arts camp for children in New Hampshire.
As John Berger.
As John Berger. It speaks volumes about his ability to blend in, doesn't it? To just assume these different roles, project an image of normalcy, even responsibility, while the monster is still lurking right underneath.
And New York City in the early 70s, it was probably the perfect place for that kind of reinvention.
Absolutely. A city of millions, constant churn, people coming and going. It was easy to get lost, adopt a new identity, meet people who had zero clue about your past. He just slipped right into that vibrant transient culture.
And he stayed hidden, operating as John Berger, until June 1971. Almost 3 years exactly since he left Tali Shapiro for dead.
Right. The sources shift the scene now. Upper East Side, Manhattan. A modern high-rise on East 83rd Street. And our focus turns to Cornelia Crilley. She was 23, a TWA flight attendant.
Just starting a new chapter herself, wasn't she? Moved into a new apartment, 14H, in that building.
Yeah. Cornelia, known as Cokie to our friends, she's described as just vibrant, independent, full of life. Her job let her travel the world. She was building this life, new friends, experiences, and she had a blossoming romance with her boyfriend, Leon Borstein.
Sounds like she had everything going for her. A bright future.
Totally. And the sources captured this really poignant everyday moment. Her last known contact, it was a phone call with Leon.
What did they talk about?
It's normal stuff. Her new apartment, settling in. She mentioned it was small, but apparently raved about the view. Tiny, but the view, wow. She told him she was exhausted from unpacking, suggested they reschedule their dinner date, confirmed tomorrow for sure, perfect.
And it ended.
Simply, love you too, just a mundane, loving conversation.
Which makes what happened next even more heartbreaking.
Absolutely. Because sometime between that completely normal phone call and the next afternoon, Rodney Alcala, operates John Berger, entered her life and brutally ended it.
How did he get into her apartment? It was on the 14th floor.
That's the thing. The source material isn't definitive. Did he use his camera, the prop for his John Berger's persona, to maybe charm his way in, pose as an artist wanting to see the view or photograph her apartment? Did he lie? Did he use force? The exact method, it remains unclear.
But once he was inside apartment 14H.
The attack was brutal, methodical. And tragically, it echoed the violence we saw in California. Cornelia Crilley was raped.
And then strangled.
Strangled with.
Likely a pair of stockings. They were found near her body in the bedroom. The sources indicate there was evidence of a struggle, too. She fought back.
And there was another crucial detail, wasn't there? Something the autopsy found. Yes. A significant bite mark. The detective dialogue referenced in the sources describes it as savage, specifically on her left breast. This bite mark, it would become a key piece of evidence, a potential identifier, but one that law enforcement in 1971 just wasn't really equipped to use immediately.
So the next day, June 23rd, 1971, her boyfriend, Leon Borstein, shows up.
Yeah, he has a key. He's expecting to see Cornelia have that rescheduled dinner. But what he finds instead, it's a scene of just unspeakable horror.
The sources recount his experience.
They do. Calling out her name, no answer. The silence in the apartment feeling deeply wrong, finding the bedroom door slightly open, pushing it, and seeing Cokie on the floor, the stocking around her neck.
Oh, God.
The descriptions capture that raw shock, the grief, using his recounted words. God, Cokie, she was on the floor, the stocking, her face. Just disbelief turning into this horrific reality. His immediate frantic call to 911 brought the NYPD rushing to the scene.
NYPD homicide arrives. Must have been a grim scene, even for them.
Absolutely. They flood the apartment, start the painstaking process of collecting evidence, the stockings used for the strangulation, trace evidence from the apartment, and critically, they documented and photographed that distinctive bite mark on Cornelia's body.
But this is 1971. And that's crucial for understanding why this case went cold, right? The limitations they faced.
Absolutely critical. DNA testing. That was pure science fiction back then. It just didn't exist as a tool for investigators. Fingerprints were the gold standard for ID.
But he wore gloves.
Exactly. Kill wore gloves, left no usable prints.
Any witnesses in a big apartment building like that?
No immediate witnesses came forward. And the name John Berger, the alias Alcala was using, it meant absolutely nothing to the NYPD's records. It was a complete dead end in New York.
Meanwhile, the name Rodney Alcala
was on a wanted poster in California, filed away 3,000 miles across the country. There was no computerized national database back then, no way to quickly connect these two names, these two crimes, across state lines.
So the case just stalled.
It went cold, fast. The source material describes the scene in the precinct squad room weeks later. Detectives just poring over the details, getting more and more frustrated.
They checked everything.
Ran down every angle, no forced entry, which suggested she maybe knew him or was tricked into letting him in. The boyfriend, Leon Borstein. Solid alibi. Quickly ruled out. Neighbors heard nothing, saw nothing unusual. One detective apparently called it classic New York, that anonymity of city living.
But they kept coming back to the bite mark.
Yeah, the medical examiner had noted how distinctive it was, said it could be the key to identifying the killer if they could ever match a specific person's teeth to it. But without a suspect, without a database connection, it's just a piece of evidence going nowhere.
Was there any lead pointing away from her immediate circle?
Just one thing. The building superintendent. He mentioned this sketchy artist-type tenant, name sounded like John Berger or Berger, paid his rent in cash and seemed to vanish right after the murder.
That had to be him.
They quickly identified this John Berger as our guy, the prime suspect.
But he was a ghost.
A complete ghost. The sources really capture the frustration. No record, no DMV hit, no social security number hit, nothing at NYU beyond a name on a class list that led nowhere. Without a real name, a photo, anything solid beyond a vague description, John Berger was just smoke. He dissolved back into the anonymity he came from.
Which led to that chilling prediction from one of the detectives.
Yeah, almost prophetic, wasn't it? Captured in the source material. This frustrated detective faced with a killer who just vanished, leaving behind this brutality and a dead-end alias. He apparently said, resigned, weary, he's gone. And he's going to do it again. Somewhere, I can feel it.
A grim premonition that tragically turned out to be absolutely true.
And just like he did in California, Rodney Alcala, now as John Berger, quietly left New York. The Cornelia Crilley murder joined the city's growing pile of unsolved homicides. A vibrant life cut short. A brutal mystery left hanging.
These two cases, Shapiro in '68, Crilley in '71, they really reveal this deeply unsettling truth, don't they? About the predator Alcala was becoming, and about how limited the system was back then.
He was learning. Learning he could commit these acts of extreme violence, and then, just by crossing state lines, changing his name, become untraceable.
Which brings us to Section 3, the aftermath and the systemic gaps these cases really expose. Let's go back to Tali Shapiro first. She survived, against all odds, as the sources keep saying. But the cost.
The cost was immense. Her recovery was incredibly hard, not just physically, from those massive head injuries and the assault itself, but emotionally, psychologically. Her life was in every way irrevocably changed by that sunny morning in 1968.
But the sources touch on the long-term impact.
Yeah, they include reflections based on survivor accounts about what that kind of profound trauma does to you. How does a young child, how does anyone process something so brutal?
The fear must be constant.
Lasting fear, yeah. The feeling that sunlight hits differently now. Shadows seem deeper. Hearing a man's voice behind you on the street makes your heart stop. Her memories of the attack itself were fragmented, just this nightmare collage of pain, fear, a metallic smell, and this pervasive, devastating feeling of being broken.
And then, years later, she sees his face again.
Yeah. Imagine that. The sources describe her seeing him on the news, maybe on TV, when they finally caught him for other things. And it was like being physically thrown back into that tiny, blood-soaked room in apartment 304.
The monster finally had his real name again, Rodney Alcala.
Exactly. And that moment, years later, brought this complex wave of emotions. On one hand, the wounds is ripped open again, right? Forced to confront the trauma anew.
On the other hand,
There was a painful kind of confirmation. Confirmation that it wasn't her fault, that the evil was entirely in him, that he was always this monster. The sources suggest that this confirmation, while agonizing, also offered maybe a measure of validation. Helped in that long process of finding some kind of closure, knowing the source of the darkness wasn't her.
So we have these two terrible crimes, two big cities, LA and New York, two victims, one who miraculously survived but carried the scars forever, the other whose life was just stolen way too soon.
Both lives irrevocably altered by the same man, using different names, leaving these trails that back then were incredibly hard to connect. Both cases went cold for a long time, basically trapped by the limitations of the era, pre-DNA, pre-digital records, pre-everything we rely on now.
Which brings us right to the core analysis of the system's failures, the points the source material keeps hitting on.
Yeah. The LAPD, they had an ID, they had evidence, but they couldn't catch Alcala after Shapiro. He just vanished. And the NYPD, they had a brutal murder, a suspect description, an alias, John Berger, but they couldn't connect him back to the wanted predator in California.
Why couldn't they? What were the biggest roadblocks?
The reasons laid out are pretty stark illustrations of pre-digital policing. Fragmented jurisdictions, number one. Information just didn't flow easily across state lines. If a New York detective wanted to know if their suspect John Berger was wanted somewhere else,
They'd have to manually check.
pretty much call or mail individual police departments all over the country, hoping maybe they had a matching description or a file. There were no centralized, computerized databases for wanted people or crime details that cross state lines easily. Records were physical paper files stuck in different departments.
And Alcala knew how to exploit that.
He was already incredibly good at it. He understood an alias was a shield. He knew that just leaving the state made it exponentially harder to find for police forces operating mainly within their own borders. His ability to just flee, adopt a new name, blend in, it was perfectly enabled by how disconnected law enforcement systems were in the late 60s, early
The
70s.
consequences of those failures, devastating.
Truly immeasurable. The first blood, as the sources put it, was spilled in California with Tali Shapiro. Her survival was this testament to her strength, to luck, to Camacho's timing, a small beacon of hope. But Cornelia Crilley's murder in New York just 3 years later, that was a grim portent.
It showed he'd learned.
He'd committed horrific violence, successfully escaped justice, learned he could kill without immediate consequence, and learned he could disappear using aliases and just distance.
The chilling reality is he wasn't caught. Not then. He wasn't contained. He was just out there, somewhere.
Yeah, the sources describe him like a chameleon, able to change his colors, his identity, disappear, reappear, hiding, waiting. The predator was loose, confirmed in his abilities, and his thirst for violence, tragically, was far from quenched.
These two early incidents, Shapiro and Crilley, they were like a terrifying training ground for him, weren't they?
They really were. They confirmed his violent capabilities to himself, and maybe even more importantly for his ability to keep going, they proved he could get away with it, just by leveraging anonymity and the system's limitations back then. These failures really set the stage for the many, many terrible crimes that came later, all enabled by the fact that a known predator was allowed to just walk away.
Okay, so let's quickly summarize what we've pulled from this deep dive into the source material today. These two early crimes, the horrific Shapiro assault in '68, the brutal Crilley murder in '71, they really reveal Alcala's terrifying pathology at a critical early stage.
Yeah, they show his capacity for extreme sadistic violence, way beyond just controlling the victim. His chilling ability to compartmentalize, to manipulate people right after an attack, and his skill in using aliases and just running away to escape consequences, understanding and exploiting the system's weaknesses.
And just as importantly, these cases starkly highlight those huge systemic failures of the time. Disconnected police forces, no easy way to share info across states, no central computerized records, slow manual processes.
All of which tragically allowed a known wanted predator to basically become a ghost and continue his spree.
The cost of those limitations. It wasn't paid by the system, was it?
Yeah.
It was paid in the shattered life of a young girl who survived against impossible odds, and in the life of a vibrant young woman stolen forever.
These cases, they're just devastating reminders of the human price. The price paid when there are cracks in the system, and a predator knows exactly how to slip through them, how to hide right there in plain sight.
And that really leaves us with a truly provocative final thought, doesn't it? Something the sources hint at when they touch on his later activities. How could a man capable of such unspeakable brutality, a man literally wanted by the police in one state, just disappear, reinvent himself with a new name?
And even go on to participate in something incredibly public, incredibly visible, like a popular national television dating show, all while remaining a fugitive killer.
What does that tell us? About the masks predators like Alcala wear, about their ability to project normalcy, charm, even charisma.
And about how easily, how tragically evil can hide right out in the open within society, slipping through those cracks that you don't even see until it's far, far too late.
Something profound to think about as we reflect on these critical, terrifying early cases.